What is up, you beautiful sickos? It's Andy. I'm back here with another 100 Ornithopters cube update. The biggest one I have done maybe ever. It's really up there. 24 swaps, actually. I missed one of the cards in this edit, which we'll talk about. But 24 swaps, which is substantial, especially considering 100 cards in the cube are fixed. So, you know, if you take the Ornithopters out and the lands out, you're looking at, I don't know, like a 15% change in all the cards in the cube, which is pretty substantial here. Is that math right? I don't know. Tell me in the comments. Let's get into it. First, I do want to say, since the heuristic studies video and a couple other sort of bits of publicity for this cube, there's a lot of people out there that have made their own copies. And if you've made your own clone of the cube, don't be dismayed when you see a big edit like this for a couple reasons. Number one, this edit is completely experimental. I have no idea if any of these are going to stick. I mean, I have an okay sense. We'll talk about the details as we go through. But I know for sure that not all these changes are going to stick. I'm testing a lot of things I'm certain are not going to stick around for a long time. And also, more importantly, you don't have to mimic my exact version of the cube. No version of the cube is more valid than any other. So if you got your own version, keep it your own version, make your own tweaks to it, make your own adjustments based on what you and your playgroup like. Do not feel pressured to keep up with my changes. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into all the changes that I did make. And the highlight here, if you've been listening to the podcast or following along at all, is that I am nerfing Disenchant yet again. We've been here before, and we are back at the nerfing Disenchants fountain. This time, instead of adjusting the density, which was the primary change I made after Bones demonstrated the extreme viability of the Disenchantress deck in paper, this time I'm instead nerfing efficiency. So we're basically coming out of this with the same amount of disenchants that we went in with, but we are making them massively, massively worse. And I'm cutting basically every efficient disenchant for now. This is another great example of where these things are experimental. I think long-term, the version of this cube that will exist in perpetuity, the ideal version of this cube, will almost certainly include at least Naturalize and Disenchant. Just because they're so iconic, I think they're power outliers, but I think it's cool for some of the removal to be power outliers. So those are probably going to still be in some version of this cube in the future, but for now, just to get my head around this problem, I'm cutting everything efficient because I want to try a really inefficient suite of removal for a little while to see how it feels and see what I learn. So we cut Disenchant, Requisition Raid, Dispeller's Capsule, Seal of Cleansing, Sundering Vitae, Naturalize, Seal of Primordium. The only one that I think is probably never coming back is unfortunately Requisition Raid. The fact that this can be a 2-for-1 plus, right? Destroying an artifact and an enchantment for 3 mana is already just cracked. I really want it to not be cracked because I love the third mode here of putting counters on all your Ornithopters. The fact that it's removal and also turns your Ornithopters into a threat is a really rare combination that I really like. But this card is proven to just be messed up. And it's messed up for the first 2 spree modes. The third mode is gravy. Sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't. But just getting 2-for-1s on your removal spells is just too messed up. So Requisition Raid is probably never coming back. I think it's utterly cracked here. These are the ones I could definitely see coming back in some combination. So that's on the cuts. Let's get to the adds. First up, Deconstruction Hammer. This is like a substantially worse Dispeller's Capsule. It requires you to have an Ornithopter in play for it to work, and also it's less mana efficient. Dispeller's Capsule is 1 to play, 3 to activate. This is 1 to play, 1 to equip, 3 to activate. So you have the equip step in between there. I still think it's probably good enough, and I think I really like the fact that it requires an Ornithopter. This is unplayable in a control deck without Ornithopters, with very few Ornithopters, which is the main deck I'm trying to address and nerf. So I think this one is probably somewhat likely to stick around. The only question here, and we'll talk about this with all these removal spells, is whether or not anybody's going to play it, because it's not very powerful. So the question is, are players going to look at it in a pack and just assume, oh, this isn't good enough, it's not worth main decking? I think it is, because I think what we've learned is that Disenchant looked fine, and it turned out to be kind of broken, really, 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 really powerful. So Deconstruction Hammer, I think, looks kind of bad on first glance, but actually I think is good. I think it's a good card. So we'll see what ends up happening there, but that's one of the ones I feel a little better about sticking around. Angelic Purge is not quite exactly what I want, but I want to try it. This exiles an artifact, creature, or enchantment, and requires you to sacrifice a permanent to cast it at sorcery speed. I like that it requires you to sacrifice something. I wish it required you to sacrifice a creature, because that would mean you could only sacrifice Ornithopters, which would mean you had to have Ornithopters in your deck, and Ornithopters mattered more. But you can sacrifice a land or whatever in your control deck, or just a treasure token or something. And the fact that it exiles the artifact, creature, or enchantment is not ideal. I do not want to punish the recursive decks. They are some of the greedier, more ambitious things to be doing, and you'll notice there's almost no or maybe zero grave hate in this entire cube, and that is by design because those decks already are kind of tricky puzzles to ever pull off, and so if you get there, I don't want you to get punished by just a random exile spell. So this one is probably honestly not likely to stick around, but I want to try it and see how it feels. Duskrow's Reliquary is almost perfect. I love that it requires you to sacrifice a creature. Awesome. It does say you can sacrifice an artifact as well, so you can still sacrifice a treasure token or something, but that's a more narrow catch-all than Angelic Purge, which you could just sacrifice a land in your control deck or something. So I like the sort of sacrifice clause on this. I love the word too. I love the efficiency at 1 mana. I really wish I could exile enchantments, but it's just artifact or creature. This one I'm on the fence about. At least one person has written in to suggest that maybe one of the ways to address this problem of disenchants is to avoid cards that destroy artifacts and enchantments and only play some cards that destroy artifacts and some cards that destroy enchantments. Therefore, they're all a little narrower and require you to sort of have a mix, right? You have to have some answers to enchantments, some answers to artifacts. I'm not convinced it's going to have a huge impact, but if that ends up working out, then this card would be a really good example of a way to make that viable. So we'll see. I'm a little skeptical of this because of the narrowness of the targets, but I like everything else about it. Dismantling Blow is actually one I think is quite good. I'm not sure this is as much of a downgrade as maybe it looks like. It's an instant speed disenchant for 3 mana, and then has kicker for 3 more mana, 6 mana total. We get to draw 2 cards. In theory, I don't like this. I don't like the fact that it is card advantage without Ornithopters at all. I think 3 mana instant speed is actually not that much of a efficiency downgrade, but it's worse than the other disenchant, so I want to run it and see how it feels for now. Also, it's got a really beautiful invasion foil that is like $2, so that's always going to convince me to try a card. These versions are always wrong in these posts. I don't ever go through, take the time to like pull the actual IDs from Scryfall or whatever, so forgive the bad versions here. Pillage is a card I'm actually feeling pretty excited about. 3 mana, sorcery, to destroy artifact or land. It can't be regenerated. One thing I'm also introducing with this set of edits is more inefficient answers to non-basic lands, or lands in general. And Pillage is one example of that. Before this edit, I believe the only answer to any lands in the entire cube was Vindicate. And I think having exactly one answer to things just kind of feels bad. Having no answers to things, like having no grave hate, at least you can then say that's a defining feature of the environment. If people ask, or if they look at the list, they can understand, okay, that's not a thing here. My graveyard is safe, or, whatever. As soon as you have one, you can't say your non-basic lands are safe, right? But it's also going to come up so infrequently that it's not correct to, like, play around it. You can't realistically, draft answers to lands. If there's only one in the entire cube, you may never see it. It might not be in those colors. And I'm actually not as worried about the Tolarian Academies and Gaia's Cradles of the world. I mean, they're obviously incredibly broken here, but they've also probably done a lot of their damage by the time a 3 mana sorcery comes online. And they're just enablers, right? They enable your deck to do something else really efficiently, and so I'm not as worried about that. This is really more for cards like Kessig Wolf Run, Gavany Township, Fomori Vault, things that are just really grindy inevitability engines that otherwise are kind of difficult to answer. I actually really like these cards because of how good they are against the Disenchant control decks we just talked about, so giving the Disenchant control decks more tools to answer otherwise difficult to answer threats might not be the vibe, but if you're not playing the Disenchant control deck, you just have a random Pillage in your deck, it might be good to answer these things. So those Disenchant control decks would often run like a Kessig Wolf Run as a win condition, which I actually don't mind that, right? Because you have to still kill with Ornithopters. So I don't know. I think having additional answers to lands is probably good, and that's what I'm trying out here. But for those other reasons, I'm a little bit hesitant to see how it plays out. Creeping Mold is another card exactly in that ilk. 4 mana sorcery, destroy artifact, enchantment, or land. A great example of a card that is maybe just not good enough and people will not play. That's my concern. Is it just won't ever get drafted by the green drafter. They'll be looking at this in a pack next to cards that are otherwise individually much more appealing, and they just won't take the Creeping Mold and won't put it in their main deck. So time will tell, but that is my concern. Really interesting little sort of micro case study here in Creeping Mold versus Bramble Crush. Creeping Mold, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. Bramble Crush, same mana value, same card type, both sorceries. Destroy target non-creature permanent. Mechanically, I actually think I prefer the Bramble Crush here. I like being able to destroy the random Planeswalker, of which there are a few. There's one Battle, so you could destroy the Battle with Bramble Crush, over being able to destroy Ornithopters. I don't Like, this can destroy Ornithopters because it says destroy target artifact. Ornithopters are artifacts, and Bramble Crush cannot. So mechanically, I think I like the Bramble Crush twist a little bit better. I don't think removing a single Ornithopter for 4 mana is any good anyway, and in the cases that it is good, you're probably punishing a deck that is like a big Voltron deck, and those are, like the graveyard combo decks, more fragile and ambitious, so I don't really want to add additional friction for them. But I think Creeping Mold reads a lot better because it says artifacts, enchantments, and lands. It says the 3 words of the things that you can kill on it. I think it's very possible that a player looking at their pool would not register that Bramble Crush is an answer to Kessig Wolfrun, or maybe even register that it's a disenchant at all. I mean, I would hope players would go that far, but I don't know. This is the kind of stuff I think cube designers should think about more. Like, yes, you can just say, get good, read the card, reading the card explains the card, or you can recognize as the cube designer that people are going to shortcut things, and it's so much easier to shortcut Creeping Mold because it has the words on it of the card types that you care about, versus Bramble Crush, which doesn't have any of those words on it. You have to do like the tiniest little bit of translation to understand the role this card plays in your deck, and so for that reason, I'm on Creeping Mold for now. Also, there's a pretty beautiful promo Creeping Mold with an old border foil, which is not nothing. I think cards being cool matters. Carnivorous Canopy is a card I think is actually kind of interesting and might stick around. This one is maybe good enough. 3 mana sorcery, it's the Disenchant, or you can also destroy a creature with flying. Not that that matters because every creature with flying is also an artifact in this environment. But if that permanent's mana value was 3 or less, proliferate. This is kind of like, I mean, it's a huge nerf, but it is kind of like Requisition Rate in that it is removal that also can play with your threats and make them more threatening. It's obviously a million times worse because it can only destroy one thing, and it only puts counters on things that already have counters on them, so you can't use this to buff 0-2 Ornithopters. You have to have already put counters on them, and then you can proliferate those counters. It also only proliferates if you destroy something small, so if you destroy their big Obelisk of Erd or whatever, you're not going to get that benefit. It's so much worse, but it also does the thing. It does the thing that I ostensibly am looking for. So yeah. Perfect mechanically, probably not good enough, maybe. That's my concern about all these, is that they're just not going to be good enough, and people will not main deck them, and we'll end up in a version of this cube that is relatively interaction light, where the only interaction is really like the counter spells and some of the board wipes, and not this sort of targeted removal. And fundamentally, I really prefer and like interactive Magic, so I don't want these games to be like parallel solitaire, where you're each just doing a big thing and ignoring what everyone else is doing and hoping your deck goes off first. That is not the gameplay I'm looking for, and I'm worried that making these things worse is going to just mean they're not going to get played, they're not going to get prioritized in the draft, they're not going to get main decked, and there'll just be less answers to Bow of Nylea, less answers to Aura Shards, less answers to Jeskai Ascendancy. And that's just going to mean that those strategies are better, and we're just playing big, non-interactive kind of, battleship, battle cruiser games of Magic, which is not what I want. So that's my concern. I do want to acknowledge a couple holdovers from this round of cuts. So Aura Shards is still here. It's still the best disenchant effect in the cube, but it fundamentally requires Ornithopters to function, which means that it is okay with me. This is a power outlier, and it's a power outlier that I enjoy and want to be present here because it does not reward ignoring the theme of the cube. You have to lean into the theme of the cube to make this card good. This version is an abomination. Collective Effort is also still here. This is truly the more fixed Requisition Raid. This one can put a counter on all your creatures, which is good. It also only destroys enchantments, which means that it is much safer to have in the cube. It can't 2-for-1 people. It also, the escalate cost requires you to tap creatures, which means that you can't do multiple of these things without having a couple Ornithopters in play. So yeah, that one's sticking around. I think that one's a good fit mechanically. I do kind of wish it could destroy artifacts and maybe cost 1 more mana or something. Not both, but make it destroy artifact or enchantment instead of just that. But I think it's still good. It makes sense. And Sheltered by Ghosts has actually proven to be quite strong here. I really like this card. The ward matters, the lifelink matters, the buff matters, and it's an O-ring that requires you to play Ornithopters. So these are kind of the efficient and strong removal that stuck around in this culling, and it's because they all care about Ornithopters. And I don't mind if people will still play these other worse versions. Then I'm kind of drawn to the idea of something like, Sheltered by Ghosts being a power outlier in the removal, being one of the better removal spells, which before this edit, I would say it was one of the worst removal spells. Now, compared to, Creeping Mold and Pillage and Angelic Purge, it's looking like maybe one of the better removal spells, which I think is good. So yeah, that is sort of the, I think, headline of all these changes. The biggest sort of texture change to the environment is really nerfing the power of the disenchant effects, but not changing their density. And the hope here is that it will make it so that the hard disenchant control deck is much more difficult to pull off because all your disenchants are bad now. So you can't build a deck that's just going to hope to answer all of your opponent's things, because answering those things is so inefficient that you have to, rely on other stuff and have a proactive strategy to win the game. The concern is that maybe these are just too inefficient and people will not play them, or play them at a much lower rate, and that will mean that the whole cube is just less interactive and not meeting my goals. And if that happens, we can blame Keldon, the Orkinator. This is basically Keldon's sort of thesis for how to fix this problem in this cube. And bless me, sorry. And even though I'm skeptical, I think it's definitely worth trying, and I think I'll learn a lot. So that's that batch of changes for the disenchants. This next set of changes I'm just really excited about. This is probably the set of changes I'm most excited about for this batch, which is adding a bunch of redundancy for Village Rites. Village Rites has been in the cube, I think, since the very beginning. It's 1 mana, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. Honestly, I haven't been super duper impressed with it. It's been fine, but it has not felt as good as, for example, a Thoughtcast effect. So for that reason, I was just on the 1 Village Rites for a while. I'm kind of drawn to the Spirit of Singleton for this cube, obviously Ornithopters aside, but I found that, having redundancy for Thoughtcast with cards like Meeting of Minds, Reverse Engineer, and Voyage Home, all these cards have felt really good, and they're also good together, right? If your deck wants a Thoughtcast, it probably also wants a Reverse Engineer, also wants a Meeting of Minds, and you can chain them into each other. One thing that I wondered about was these cards require you to have Ornithopters to be good, but you're oftentimes going to be cutting an Ornithopter to put them in your deck. And so is there this tension where you actually don't want too many of these because then you just don't have enough Ornithopters? And I think realistically we're pretty far from that. And it was actually Julian who pointed out a detail when I was discussing a roto deck of mine, where he was like, hey, look, the deal with these things is that they are obviously just as good as an Ornithopter or better if you're going off, right? If you have a bunch of Ornithopters in play and you cast your Thoughtcast and you draw into Reverse Engineer, you're very happy to have that. But they're also good when you don't have any Ornithopters yet, right? Because it's fine in this cube to just get to 5 mana and cast a draw 3. That's fine. Or, have 1 Ornithopter in play, make it a 4 mana draw 3. That's a completely reasonable sort of place to be. So the fact that they're good both before you're going off and when you're going off means that I think it's correct most of the time to just go lower on Ornithopters to go higher on these kinds of effects. I think the exact same thing is going to be true of all of these Village Rites effects. Corrupted Conviction is just a functional duplicate of Village Rites. Eviscerator's Insight, a little more expensive, but has flashback, and you can also sacrifice a non-creature artifact. Barter in Blood is the Reverse Engineer in black, basically. You got to sacrifice 2 creatures, but you get to draw 3 cards. And then Deadly Dispute is, 1 more mana, but then you get a treasure back, and you can also sacrifice non-creature artifacts. So all slight variations on these things. I don't think any one of these is a lot better than the other. I think Deadly Dispute is cool because it helps you sort of splash or, fix your mana a little bit. I'm excited about Barter in Blood because it's got, just the possibility of drawing 3 cards for 1 card, or, you're playing in a deck where you can get your Ornithopters back from your graveyard. So it doesn't really cost you the 2 Ornithopters so much, because you don't want to play this in a deck where you're not caring about those Ornithopters in your graveyard or caring about sacrificing them. So I'm really excited about these cards. I also think that adding more of these, increasing the density, is going to make them all better, right? If I have 1 Village Rites in my deck, how much more highly am I going to take a Pia's Revolution or a Skull Clamp or a Meathook Massacre? 1 is not really going to affect my sort of evaluation of these other cards that highly, but all these cards are really good if you are not going off or comboing infinitely, but just playing these sacrifice cards for value, right? Skull Clamp is obviously insane with all of these, right? You just turn any of these cards into a massive card draw spell. And so that's incredible. This is a card that otherwise I think Skullclamp is good here, but it really is a combo card currently. You really want to be comboing with one of the altars or Krark-Clan Ironworks, where you are sacrificing to pay the equip cost to draw more Ornithopters and just kind of churn through your deck. You want a repeatable sack outlet. I think you can also very much have a good, fair Skullclamp in this cube just by having enough of these spells that the Skullclamp then becomes really strong. Pia's Revolution, Meathook Massacre, same thing. I think you can make a very fair sacrifice deck that doesn't have to combo off or go infinite. It can just play these things for value. And all these cards also just address one of the fundamental challenges of this cube, which is that drawing cards is important, and you can often get to a point where you're just kind of top decking, and if you don't have a way to augment your Ornithopters, and your Ornithopters are dead draws, and now you have lands and Ornithopters in your deck are dead draws, so your like amount of action cards are just fewer. Anything to get the cards flowing, I think, is fundamentally healthy for the environment, and so I am pretty confident in these swaps. I think this is going to be a change I'm going to stick to and I feel really good about. So that's that. There is one that I'm not playing right now, which is Fanatical Offering, which does a similar thing, makes a map token instead of a treasure token. Map token is cool because it can also augment an Ornithopter. It can play with plus and plus one counter synergies. What I don't love is that I don't have anything that makes map tokens right now, so it'll be another unique token. I also don't love that it doesn't have the reminder text for Explore on it. So for those reasons, I'm avoiding that one for now. But if I end up really loving this density, and there's now 5 spells like this, 6 if you count Plummet Forbidden, which I think you should. So 6, spells, instant sorceries in black that sacrifice your creatures to draw cards. If I want a 7th, then the next one is probably going to be Fanatical Offering. Now onto the sort of more cool stuff that I'm excited about, the more like onesie-twosie edits. These changes I think are really interesting. This is where the cube design, I think, gets really fascinating. These on their face have nothing to do with Ornithopters at all, right? Like if we're doing the level 1, what is Hunter Ornithopters about? It's like, it's about using a bunch of Artifact Matters cards, a bunch of Spellcast Matters cards, a bunch of, Creatures Matter cards, like things that care about the rules text on the card Ornithopter and like using that to some benefit, right? The level 1 is just like, make all your Ornithopters big and attack. Maybe the level 2 understanding of the environment is like recognizing the fact that because that's the level 1 strategy, things like Disenchants and Duress effects are really strong because they are a way to generate a ton of virtual card advantage against that sort of level 1 strategy. So you look at a Disenchant or a Duress, and it's a little further from the theme. It's not obvious, like it's not the theme hitting you over the head, but it's kind of one step removed, and you understand that, okay, well, if the baseline is like play a bunch of Ornithopters and, a Curse of Predation or a Door of Destinies, all I have to do is remove that Door of Destinies, and now, I've sort of had a huge swing in terms of the virtual card advantage of the game. I think this is the third step away, the third sort of level of removal. We keep sort of understanding this environment better and better. We arrive at things like this. Lotus Bloom and 2 storage lands. Storage lands are, there was actually a great video by, what's that channel? Oh, that's why I hate doing these things live and not being able to edit. Just search up it was about the control decks in this era of the storage lands and talked about how valuable they were in these control decks because these are pretty bad fixing lands, right? They come into play untapped. They tap for a colorless. You can pay 1 to put a storage counter on it and tap it. So once a turn, if you're not using that colorless mana, you can tap, put a storage counter on it. Then you can pay 1 and remove X storage counters from them to add mana in any combination of those 2 colors to your mana pool. Bad fixing, really inefficient, slow fixing. What they are good at is if you have turns where you otherwise have nothing to do or you want to hold up instants, you don't end up needing to cast those instants, you can build up mana turn over turn, and after 3 turns of putting mana into this, it actually allows you to do like a really big explosive turn where you have a bunch of mana available and have this sort of injection of tempo. It comes really late in the game, right? And you have to put a bunch of resources into it. It's fundamentally very inefficient. Like the whole thing is not efficient, but it does allow for explosiveness. You can like move resources between turns in a way that is potentially very powerful. Lotus Bloom is just Black Lotus with Suspend. You cannot cast it. It has no casting cost. You have to suspend it for 0, and then 3 turns later you get a Black Lotus. These cards all have to do with, I think, again, this sort of higher order understanding of what this cube is about, which is the fact that very oftentimes you're just kind of passing turns back and forth, right? I think maybe people's first assumptions about this cube is that, all these creatures cost 0, so like the first couple turns of the game are going to be crazy because I'll play 2 creatures, you'll play 3 creatures. But the thing is, they cost 0, so you don't play the Ornithopters until you actually need to do something with them, right? There's no reason to just run out your Ornithopters, expose them to board wipes, expose them to whatever, unless you have one of your synergistic cards that you can cast right now to get benefit from it. So in reality, you actually just kind of sit there for the first few turns of the game, almost every deck does, and just pass back and forth and wait until you have enough mana to start enacting your plan, whatever that plan may be. It's not 100% universal, right? There are aggro decks. The Echoing Boon deck usually plays an Ornithopter or 2 on turn 1 so that it can have non-summoning sick creatures to attack on turn 2 when it can start casting its spells. But a lot of the decks the mid-range decks, the combo decks, the control decks, there's a lot of turns of doing nothing. I don't think that's an inherently bad thing about the environment, by the way. I think some people might look at that and say, like, oh, it's a boring cube because there's a lot of turns where nothing happens. I don't think that's true, and I think if you're playing, if you're playing with anything short of, like, the absolute utmost attention and care, these turns are very fast. You don't have to think about anything. You just, draw and pass back and forth, and if you're both doing that, I don't think it, like, detracts from the quality of the playing experience with the cube. What it does do is open up the possibility for these cards to potentially shine. The storage lands, if you're doing nothing on your turns, you can just put mana into them, and then when you have a big turn where you're going to combo off, you're going to play multiple synergistic cards all in the same turn to try and get around removal, or to like pressure your opponent's answers, or just to go off all at once so that you don't have to like leave things in play so they can get removed by sorcery speed answers. These are great at that. If you don't have to do anything for the first couple turns, you can dump mana into them and then get a bunch of mana out later. And I actually think Julian recommended one of these cards, or a representative storage land, ages ago. And I was just like, they seem bad. Like, just power level wise, they seem bad. But I do think, actually, the texture of this environment is such that these might have a home here. There's only 5, I believe. So I'm playing 2 of the 5 as a sort of test. And I'm playing them in the colors that I think would most want to use that sort of big burst of resources. But if this goes well, I could see adding more. And it could go poorly, and I could see cutting them. But that's the reason that they're here. And I actually think I'm pretty optimistic about this. Lotus Bloom is the same thing, right? You suspend this on an early turn of the game, turn 1, turn 2, and then by the time your mana would be such that you would be trying to go off otherwise, and you'd have 4 or 5 mana, now you have 7 or 8 mana because of Lotus Bloom. It also plays really, really well with the variety of Second Sunrise Faith's Reward effects in the cube. If you are a Faith's Reward Second Sunrise deck, you will love Lotus Bloom, because if you can get it in play, you go off with it. When you cast Faith's Reward or Second Sunrise, it just comes right back into play. It doesn't go back on suspend. So now you just have a Black Lotus for all of your Second Sunrise and Faith's Reward loops. And I think that could be a cool payoff for those decks. I really like those decks. I think they're awesome. And I would love to give them more tools, and so I think it also kind of works there. I could also see playing this in a deck that doesn't have Second Sunrise or Faith's Reward and just is like a combo deck that needs a lot of resources to go off in one turn. It is going to be a dead draw some of the times. You're going to draw this in the late game, and you're going to be dead before it comes off suspend, and that's going to be a bummer. But, there's already a bunch of dead draws in this environment. There's already a bunch of Ornithopters that are not good at every part of the game. There's already, lands in your deck. I'm already over-indexing in this cube for ways to deal with cards that are dead draws sometimes. There's a lot of rummaging and looting and, ways to do stuff with cards that you don't need in your hand at the moment. And so I think this is actually a good fit here because you can just do that. It also kind of works with Duretti. You can discard this to Duretti instead of suspending it and then buy it back by sacrificing an Ornithopter. It's got a lot of cool little applications, and it's also just a card I really love. I think it's very cool to have, like I think LED and Lotus Bloom are, like, some of the coolest Magic cards where they are, like, an iconic broken card that is, like, nerfed substantially in a way that at first you're like, this can't even be playable, but then you can still find ways to make it good. That's very exciting to me. So this batch of changes here I think is really interesting just from a theoretical cube design perspective, because I think it's emblematic of the fact that this cube is now approaching 50 drafts in paper, plus all the other drafts of people's clones that I've seen do, or people have drafted this cube online. So it's had a lot of drafts, and I think we're starting to learn more and more about what matters here, what the texture of these games actually is, and that means we can start playing cards that would never have been in anybody's first draft of a 100 Ornithopters cube. Wasn't in my first draft. I can't imagine almost anybody would have done this sort of mental leap to get to here without a bunch of playtesting. But here we are, and I think these cards have a fair bit of promise. So I'm excited about those. I think it could be cool. Then I ran out of characters in my blog post because I wrote too much. So let's back up here and go to the next blog post. I'm adding a couple more ways to protect combos. Abeyance and Defense Grid. Defense Grid is cool. It's colorless, and it works against counter spells most obviously, but it also works against instant speed, disenchant effects, or whatever. So this you can just play out of the sideboard in any combo deck if your opponent shows instant speed interaction that could stop you from winning. And if you have a big ad nause, you draw your whole deck or whatever, on that turn you can start with the defense grid to then protect everything else you do so you can win with protection, which I think it's going to be a sideboard card, but I think a sideboard card that is like, this is the kind of sideboard card I like. It's colorless, it's relatively cheap. You're going to get it late in the draft if you want it, like you're not going to have to prioritize it, but it'll be a great card out of the sideboard. Abeyance is doing a very similar thing. I was thinking originally of running just Silence, but I don't like that Silence can be used proactively to like stop your opponent's combo. I don't want like another control piece. I just want a way to protect your own combo. But Silence stops every spell. Abeyance only stops instants, interrupts, and sorceries, or abilities requiring activation cost, activated abilities, which is a really cool suite of things which will stop basically all of the ways to answer any combos, but interrupts very few actual combos. Like this will stop you if your opponent's like trying to go off with like a bought back Haze of Rage a bunch of times, right? That could be a bummer. But for the most part, the ways to win are not instant sorceries or instant sorceries. They are artifacts and enchantments. So this will not really be very good at all at stopping your opponent's combos. But again, just like Defense Grid, if you draw your whole deck and you have a big turn where you're about to go off, this will play a similar role to like, leading on a Thoughtseize or leading on a Duress, where you can just protect everything. You're going to check for answers and make sure that your opponent's not going to be able to interrupt what you're doing and then theoretically go off. It has the upside of just also cantripping, which is really nice. I think this is like, for example, fantastic at protecting like a Jeskai Ascendancy combo because it also triggers Jeskai Ascendancy. It also draws you a card. It does a lot of things. These I'm skeptical of overall, to be honest. I think they're going to be pretty narrow, and I'm also doing this thing right now where I am simultaneously nerfing a lot of the answers and also adding more answers to the answers. Like maybe Defense Grid and Abeyance make a lot more sense in a world where we have Disenchant and Naturalize and maybe even like Nature's Claim in this cube. But without them, I'm not sure how viable these are going to be. So maybe I'm changing too many variables to really understand, but I think I'm going to learn something from these cards, and I'm curious to see what they do. Now, some changes that are sort of not thematic, just one-off things that I'm adding. Gonna try Steel Shaper's Gift. 1 mana tutor for an equipment, put it into your hand. I think this is actually just good enough if you have the Aether Spark in your deck. The Aether Spark's really good. You probably want at least one other target, even if it's not an ideal one, just so Steel Saber's Gift isn't dead if you already draw on the Aether Spark. But 1 mana tutors, pretty strong, I think. It goes right to your hand, doesn't have to go on top of your library or anything. But obviously what I mostly want it for is like Colossus Hammer decks, and I think also now that I have Deconstruction Hammer, you can build kind of a little toolbox with it too. Bones pointed out that maybe I should be playing Open the Armory instead, which is 1 mana more, and it can also get auras, and I think he's probably actually right about that. So I think the mana efficiency is not actually super duper important here because, again, there's turns off where you're taking time. You can like take time to build up resources to set up for the most part, so I think the 1 mana difference is not huge, but being able to get a couple of key auras, like, you can get Tempest Technique is the biggest one, which is huge. You get Tempest Technique, and that's your sort of win condition in your Storm deck. That's tutorable with Open the Armory. So I'll probably end up swapping this for Open the Armory at some point, but I still want to get in reps with this one too. Maybe both. I mean, if this feels really good, then maybe I'll just play both alongside each other. I could see that world. Shard, of course, has been in and out quite a few times in this cube, and I'm just bringing it back. It's just more redundancy, effectively, for Thoughtcast. It does Thoughtcast things. It always costs 2 mana, but you do want to have an Ornithopter, so you can draw 2 instead of draw and discard. For the same reason, all the sort of black sacrifice and card draw stuff is good. I think that Chart, of course, is quite strong. And just drawing cards is really important here, so you don't have all these dead turns. I don't know how I overlooked Mindbreak Trap for this cube. It seems like it belongs here very much. If an opponent casts 3 more spells this turn, you may pay this card for free, basically. It does also exile the target spell, so that's a thing to think about. This is just, a pretty good free counterspell. I don't know if this is actually going to be what I want to include. I don't love that non-blue decks can play this, especially out of the sideboard, if your opponent has a combo that requires ending with their payoff. And it's worth noting, some combos you start with the payoff, and so you can play the payoff and then a bunch of Ornithopters, in which case Mindbreak Trap really doesn't do much. You could counter 1 Ornithopter, I guess, but the chances of that matters are pretty slim. But some combos are definitely play your Ornithopters first, then play your payoff, and that's going to be quite good. This is also an answer to all the Storm stuff, which is very real, because it exiles any number of target spells, so they get Storm copies of, Haze of Rage or Tempest Technique, and Mindbreak Trap answers that. which it's unclear to me right now if those cards need more answers, frankly. I really love Tempest Technique. It's been really strong, but not strong in a way I think has been frustrating. And this might be just a little bit annoying to have like, oh, my non-blue deck has a like silver bullet against your whole committed Tempest Technique deck. Maybe that is not fun. I guess we're going to have to find out. Balgad Recovery is a card I think is actually very promising here. This is just 3 mana regrowth or a tapped green land on the back. I think the MDFCs are actually very good here because you want to run a low land count in this cube because almost every deck has the capability of drawing tons of cards. And also, half your spells are free, at least. So, mana feels like less of a constraint here to a lot of people right out of the gate. But in reality, I've actually found that people's initial impressions of how big the land count should be are a little bit aggressive because most decks do really need to get to like 3 mana. You want to hit your 3rd or even 4th land drop. A lot of the payoffs cost 3 or 4 mana. And so you really can't reliably do that on a deck that only has 12 lands in it unless you are, unless you have Glimpse of Nature and Rite of Harmony and a tutor for them, right? And then you can like reliably make sure that your deck by turn 3 has drawn a butt ton of cards. These cards are great. The MDFCs are great. The ones that have lands on the back specifically because they are lands if you need them, obviously. But if you are at the point in the game where you've already drawn all the lands you need, you've drawn a bunch of cards, and your sort of engine is online, then it just becomes a copy of Regrowth. And Regrowth, I think, is a really strong effect here because there's a lot of important cards that play very specific roles. This is just another copy of your best win conditions, another copy of your best interactive spell. And somebody at some point will definitely return Ornithopter to their hand to win with it. I guarantee that will happen, and that will be cool. So I think I should do a little bit of a deeper dive on these MDFCs. Right now I'm on Revitalizing Repast and Strength of the Harvest and Legion Leadership as my only other ones. I was, for a time, on Kozul's Fury, the fling with a red land on the back. But I think they just fill a nice niche here that is probably worth digging a little deeper on. Sterling Grove is another card that I'm surprised never occurred to me. Not because I think it's a a slam dunk in this cube necessarily, but because there's an Enchantress theme, and I have a ton of tutors in this cube, and this is like the obvious Enchantress tutor card. This is really good against Disenchant control decks. It's basically another must-answer Disenchant, or must-answer enchantment, because you can't destroy any other enchantment unless you destroy Sterling Grove first. And if your opponent does have answers to Sterling Grove, you're not worried about disenchants, then you can obviously just, shuffle your library. You can obviously turn it into a tutor to put the best enchantment from your deck on top of your library. I'm a little worried this doesn't do anything. Like, the actual card doesn't do anything. It's a inefficient tutor. 3 mana, putting it on top of your library, costing you a card is like pretty bad. And giving other enchantment Shroud doesn't do. I mean, it can make your opponent's life a little more difficult if they're trying to play control, but it doesn't advance your game plan at all. And the card slots are really tight both in decks and in this cube. It's hard to put a card in your deck that is not an Ornithopter, not a land, and not a win condition, or a removal spell. And this is none of those things. So I think it might just not do enough, but I really have to try it to find out and see what it does. I will say also I'm a little concerned that this being another green, white, gold card will just mean that this is very often paired with Aura Shards and either just goes and gets Aura Shard or Aura Shards, or gives your Aura Shards Shroud, so your opponent can't even target your Aura Shards with their removal spells. They have 1 disenchant, doesn't matter because they have to spend it on the Sterling Grove. I don't know. I'm not feeling very optimistic about this one, but I want to see if someone can really make a dedicated Enchantress thing work. Pithing Needle is an interesting one here. This has been in the maybe board for a long time, and I honestly didn't think there was enough things with activated abilities that would matter. This is actually coming in as another answer to those lands. This is a good thing against Kessig Wolfrun or Gavany Township or Fomori Vault, but it doesn't stop the mana producing lands. And I actually counted, and there's 52 things by my count that Pithing Needle could hit reasonably. I'm not counting things that are like not worth hitting at all because they don't do anything. Like I'm not counting the fetch lands here, for example, because yes, you can name a fetch land, but you won't have the opportunity because that won't happen. So I'm not counting those. 52 things you could actually reasonably name means that on average your opponent should have about 6 in their pool, which I think is probably enough. And the cards I'm most interested in punishing with the Needle are all 4 Planeswalkers, though the Everspark matters less because it's also an artifact, so it's susceptible to more removal than the other Planeswalkers are. These non-basic lands, Wolfrun, Township, Vault. It also has Bow of Nylea, which I think is quite good. A 1 mana colorless answer to Bow is also great. So this is in the sort of ranks of Pillage and Creeping Mold in terms of ways to answer some of these non-basic lands, and also just a generic sort of sideboardy answer to a lot of different combo things. So we'll see. This is another one I feel like players might just overlook, but you get it late for free in the draft, and maybe you have the sort of presence of mind to side it in when it matters, and it's just another way to get some more interaction in here. We'll see. Coveted Jewel is one people have been recommending for a long time. It's a really cool tinker target, draws 3 cards, produces a bunch of mana, really good with like Paradox Engine and ways to untap your, non-land permanents so you can generate a bunch of mana. The reason I have been off it, honestly, is I think it's just utterly swagless. It's like such a commander card to me. I think the art is really unappealing and uninspiring. But I do think mechanically it's very cool. It's also kind of cool that it specifically rewards an opponent attacking you and leaving a creature unblocked. The Ornithopters do not have to have power to steal the Coveted Jewel, which I think actually matters a lot. This is also a cool way to like punish control decks. If you're not playing enough Ornithopters, then you have no way to steal this Coveted Jewel. It's going to be much harder for you to come back. It rewards you putting Ornithopters in your deck. So mechanically, I think it's great. I think it's honestly going to stick around for a long time now that I've gotten over the it is extremely uncool hurdle. And it's another cool way to have a Tinker target or a Duretti target, which I think is cool. Escape Tunnel. It's a Evolving Wilds that also can make a creature unblockable. I think this is a cool way to get more mana fixing, to get more effects like making creature unblockable into people's decks, because people will play this just as mana fixing, and they should. It's correct to play this just as mana fixing as long as you have enough basic lands. And then sometimes you'll be like, oh, now I can make my creature unblockable, and then afterwards pump it with a huge Mishra's command or whatever, some big pump spell to make it lethal. So I think this actually works really well here. It's kind of unassuming, but is a sick fit. I think Alex recommended this, so shout out to Alex. Notes on the other cuts, just to sort of touch on them. Forge Anew has, again, been in and out a bunch with this in this cube. It is another copy of Sigarda's Aether Hammer of Nazan in terms of it giving you a free equip, but I think people often ignore that or don't see it, and they just instead see, oh, returns an equipment from my graveyard to the battlefield. I need equipment, and also I need to like be milling cards or drawing or like rummaging or looting or something for it to be good. And realistically, I think it's the other two abilities that matter. 3 mana, you can activate equip abilities at instant speed, and you can also pay 0 to do the first equip for free. This just means if you have a big Cranial Plating or a Colossus Hammer or a Belt of Giant Strength, your opponent needs a blocker for every single one of your attackers, because if you leave one unblocked, then you can instant speed move the equipment to the unblocked one to deal a bunch of damage, which I think is very good. But people keep overlooking it. I'm swapping out for Steel Shaper's Gift right now, basically. It's filling the same role. It's going to, play in the same decks, and in many cases find your, Hammer of Nazan or whatever. But we'll see. We'll see if that ends up staying out. Word of Invention is a pretty expensive tutor. I just don't think this is necessary. There's a ton of ways to draw a bunch of cards in blue and in this cube, and I don't think you need to have a tutor to draw your win condition. I think you can just draw it by casting a Paradoxical Outcome or whatever. It's pretty inefficient. Requiring triple blue that you can't get any help from your Ornithopters means that it's a pretty expensive tutor. Prototype is kind of cool on paper. It's, in theory, a ramp spell and also a answer with the channel ability, and also a sort of combo with your Paradox Engine, where now it turns your Paradox Engine into mana, which is kind of cool. But I think realistically it doesn't do enough and it's getting cut. Force of Despair. Man, these versions are really killing me. This game. Jeez. Ugh. Oh well. Force of Despair is an interesting one. I have seen this card be very good, but really only against players that don't understand the texture of the environment. People that are like, okay, well, I guess I play out of my Ornithopters and then pass. And it's like, okay, we'll force it to spare you. When, like I said earlier, you're really not supposed to play your Ornithopters until you can immediately get value off of them in some way. And so sometimes you can walk into a Force of Despair. You can play out your Ornithopters and then tap out for an Obelisk of Erd and then get Force of Despaired. But even then, you still get the Obelisk. There, you much rather just disenchant the Obelisk, frankly, than destroy other Ornithopters, which they have many ways to get back, or they can just draw more of them. So this card was fine, but really, honestly, it mostly just punished people that didn't understand how to play their deck, which is not great. I'm cutting Inquisition and Thoughtseize again for now. They're both great, but they're just known quantities. I know what they do, and so I need space to learn about all these other cards, and I could still decide to bring them back in the future if I want more hand hate. But the fact that they are hand hate that is really not thematic at all is kind of a bummer. Wishclaw Talisman, another really inefficient tutor, and it's clunky. I saw this one also not getting played that much. It's kind of cool because it has, the artifact fact on it, and you can, like, for example, activate it and then return it to your hand with, like, paradoxical outcome. There's, like, weird little tricks you can do, but realistically, I think it's just not good enough. Battle Hymn was cute, but I don't think I saw anybody ever put this in a deck or on the stack. So, yeah, out it goes. First day of class is a kind of painful cut. I love this because it's a mass haste enabler. It also puts +1/+1 counters to your Ornithopters. It does a lot. People keep asking if there's lessons in the cube whenever they see first day of class, which is a fair question, but Learn is also just good if you just discard and draw. Like, that's also just a good ability. I was kind of tired of people asking me about lessons. So that was a bummer. Bitter Reunion has been perfect. This card is exactly what I want the mass haste enablers to be, and I'm going to try another one. I think it would probably honestly be like a Mass Hysteria or a Concordant Crossroads, because what you want these mass haste enablers for is really like, you want them to be really efficient, because you want to have a turn where you do a bunch of other stuff and also enable haste for everybody, which is why Bitter Reunion is great. One colorless mana on the turn you care about to give everything haste is really good. Then you can spend the rest of your mana casting a big Biomass Mutation or, Haze of Rage bought back a couple times or whatever. If you got to spend 2 mana on it, it's a little harder to justify. So if I come to another Mass Haste Enabler, which I do think I want another one at least eventually, it's probably going to be one of the 1 mana symmetrical ones. It's very simple. Lightning Volley was a kind of cute way to get around disenchants, because you can't disenchant this like you can disenchant Chiron Negotiations for the tap combo decks. The really frustrating thing about this was that a lot of the ways that you were going to go off with the tap combo decks involved playing a bunch of Ornithopters and recurring them repeatedly. Like, let's say you have a Blood Bond March and a Chiron Negotiations. Then every time an Ornithopter dies, you can tap all your Ornithopters, and then when they come back untapped. You can just kind of like keep cycling through them in a way that's really interesting. Or, Jeskai Ascendancy allows you to, like, every time you play a creature, you can then tap one of them to Chiron Negotiations to deal damage. The fact that it doesn't give them haste, breaks up some of those combos, and also the fact that it only cares about creatures that are in play when the Lightning Volley resolves. Those are 2 logistical things that made it really hard to actually logistically go off in these combo decks. So that's out of here. Draconic Destiny, I think, filled in a really important role as a haste enabler and a win condition for arbitrarily large amounts of mana. Those are 2 things I really want to have, have cards that pay off. But frankly, I think Mishra's Command is just doing that better. It does the same thing. If you have enough mana, it gives your creatures haste, and also makes them a lethal threat. But it has all these other modes. You can also kill a Planeswalker. I've seen pretty often this just, clear the last blocker that would otherwise be chump blocking to, make your attack lethal. You can also, obviously use it to draw cards. So it's just more flexible in Draconic Destiny. I don't think I need 2 of them. So that's out. I've got plenty of cards to play off the top of the deck. Experimental Frenzy is just the least appealing one. I needed to make room and red. Corrosive Adaptation is the kind of thing some people will be sad to see. I'm actually not that sad to see it. This was really cool. I loved this card in this cube for a long time because it's very novel. The Aura with Storm is cool. I own like 30 copies because I wanted to make sure the token box had enough copies to play all of them. But a couple things. One, the storm count has to be really, really, really high for +1/+0 and Vigilance to matter almost at all. Like, even storm count 10. Okay, you're putting 10 power in play across a couple creatures. That's not going to be a lethal clock. You're not going to kill somebody out of nowhere with that. Like, that's only 10 damage. If they have, no blockers, that's not going to be immediately lethal. And then it also, the fact that it's a playtest card, I think, is a little bit of an eyesore. I mean, it's kind of cool as the only playtest card, but I think some people, read it differently or don't see it as green. It's got, like, aesthetic challenges. And frankly, Tempest Technique is everything I ever wanted Corrosive Adaptation to be. This, you don't need an insanely high storm count before this is lethal. Like, storm count like 4, and you're getting 4 copies of these, and every copy is giving +4/+4 at least. Probably more if you have other enchantments in play. Like, that's, even though the storm count 4, that's already 16 power compared to 10 with storm count 10 on Corrosive Adaptation. Which is just so much better. It's way worth the 4 mana. Like, that's totally fine. This has been one of my favorite win conditions for decks where you just, like, end step, paradoxical outcome, pick up all your Ornithopters, play them all again, Tempest Technique, make them all enormous, and make your opponent have an answer. I saw Jane go absolutely dummy with Tempest Technique and Scapegoat, where she would pick up on end step just enough Ornithopters to make Tempest Technique big enough to leave the ones that were still in play as lethal threats because they would not have summoning sickness, so she could just end step, Scapegoat, pick up a bunch of Ornithopters, untap, play them again, play Tempest Technique, make the non-summoning sick ones lethal. It's so cool. And with Tempest Technique here, the sort of novelty of Corrosive Adaptation being like an aura with Storm is just gone, and it's not good enough. So that's getting out. Forsaken Monument is just getting cut. I think I have enough big artifacts that pump the whole team and present win conditions, and I have room to cut one, and this is my least favorite. I don't like the life gain on this one, and I think the sort of tap a permanent for colors, making additional colors is kind of just a distraction. Banner of Kinship is the most recent addition, and it's so much better, and I think when I added this, I honestly should have realized I don't need that many. I only need a couple of these things, and Forsaken Monument is my least favorite one, so it's gone. I'm probably pretty sad to be cutting Fallen Ideal. It's maybe the card I'm most sad to cut here. It is a sack outlet, which matters. There's a lot of decks that just want a free sack outlet. Honestly, my deck last night, I would have really loved to have a Fallen Ideal in it if I had a chance to draft it, because I wanted more free sack outlets. It also represents a win condition on its own, but it does both those things pretty inefficiently. So for now, it is getting cut. I could see this coming back, though honestly, I think players don't play this card as much as they should. It actually does more than it looks like on paper. And then maybe a cut that is also bumming me out is Mnemonic Betrayal. This is Yogg-Soil, but for your opponent's graveyard, which means you can take all their Ornithopters as a baseline, and then anything else you have the mana to pay for. It's very cool. I actually have not found the logistics of having to keep track of which Ornithopters are your opponents to be that problematic, though it's certainly something to be concerned about here. I have seen players try to use this as like a control win condition, where like they don't really play their own win condition, they just play control spells and then eventually want to kill their opponent with Mnemonic Betrayal, which point one has not really worked that well. I've not seen anybody really succeed with that strategy, and even if they did, I think it's kind of cool. You're still killing them with the Ornithopters Matter win condition, right? Like whatever your opponent's doing is how you're going to win, so they're doing something Ornithopters Matter. It means Mnemonic Betrayal fundamentally has to be doing something Ornithopters Matter. I just am cutting it because I need room, and I can see this coming back after I learn more about the rest of these edits. This is one of those things where like you just got to cut a card and see how you feel missing it, and we'll see how I feel missing this in a couple weeks. Then there's one other change here. I missed adding Coveted Jewel in that edit, just miscounted cards. So, also had to cut Symbiotic Deployment, which another one's kind of painful because it's very cool here, but this is kind of like Force of Despair in that new players would often get really punished by it. They would just play it in a random deck and think, great, I can turn a big board into a bunch of card draw, and then they just eat a board wipe, and now they're locked out of the game because they no longer have a draw step. So it's very cool, but was also punishing, I think, the wrong kinds of players. I don't want to punish that kind of inexperience with the cube. So a bummer to cut it, but I think that one's probably not coming back, if I'm honest, just because we're only going to get more cards, maybe more cards that are better fits, and yeah, that one was just punishing the wrong things. So yeah, that is where we are. 24 swaps on this. I should say that, like I said, these are experimental changes. I'm committed to keeping these at least through Capital Cube Champs. So if you're watching this before Capital Cube Champs, this is the version of the cube you'll be playing. Maybe one or two cards get swapped out just for other reasons, but for sure, this sort of approach to removal is going to be present, and something you should be aware of, especially if you played the cube before or thought about the cube before. This is a change, and I'll be desperately looking for feedback. So if you do draft this cube at Capital Cube Champs, I want to know everything about how you felt, what your deck was doing, what your opponent's deck was doing. The more qualitative feedback I can get, the better. I'm committed to keeping this way for a little while. I'll say at least we get to 50 drafts. I think we're at 44 or something. So at least we get to 50 drafts. I'm going to keep this, and then we'll see what changes I make afterwards. But I'm concerned about some of these edits, like I said, and even more reason that if you're making your own copy at home, don't just mimic my own edits. Either do your own thing or just be happy with the version of the cube you happen to have built the first time, and don't worry about following all my changes. And if you want to know what I really love, keep watching these videos and following the blog. I think, for example, you probably do want to add these sacrifice and card draw spells. They are very cheap monetarily, and I think are great for the environment. That's my pretty strong opinion. So maybe those you do want to add, but hold off on buying creeping molds and carnivorous canopies until I tell you if they actually are playable. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to my ongoing work on this very strange project that I am so dedicated to making this cube great. I think we're going to get there with continued effort. Anyway, bye-bye.